All right, so now let's tackle what exactly is HTML and how do we use it to structure our websites. So no matter what you use as your browser, it could be Chrome, it could be Safari or Firefox, they all have a single purpose, and that's to interpret your files, such as your HTML files, your CSS files, your JavaScript files, into a website that should be displayed. For example, we've got a little bit of HTML code here that says that our website should have a title called Hello, and in the body, there should be a heading that says Hello World. So if we pass that code into our browser, it will open it and display it like so, with the title of the website usually on the tab bar, and that H1 or that big heading showing up in the body of our website. So before we dive deep into this, it's really important to remember that HTML is the foundation of all websites. So for example, you won't see websites that are created using just a CSS file or just a JavaScript file, but you can create websites using just an HTML file. Now, it might not look great. It'll probably look like it came from the 90s, but it does enable your website to display text or various elements such as images or forms or tables, depending on how you code up the HTML file. So HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And the really important part here is the word markup, because there's many markup languages. For example, you might have heard of things such as XML, Extensible Markup Language, or GML, Generalized Markup Language, and all of these languages share a common history. They're based off the markup that used to be put into manuscripts, where editors would mark up the manuscript and either specify changes to the author or specify structure and layout to the publishers. So for example, you might have the squiggly line that shows the publishers that this part should be printed in bold or this part should be printed in italics. And HTML works in much the same way. You can specify the layout and structure of your website by using HTML tags. So if you head over to your browser and go to a website called codepen.io, then we can have a look and have a play around with real live HTML. So you don't have to sign up, just head over to codepen.io and then hit create new pen. And then we're going to change the view to a format like this. So this is the live version of our website. And these are the places where we're going to put our code. So as you can see, CodePen lets you put in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which will together get interpreted and get shown on the left as your website. Now, as we're only working with HTML at the moment, I'm going to minimize the CSS and JavaScript sections, and I'm just going to work from the HTML section. Now, we're going to need some text to work with or to have something which we can give structure to. If you head over to gutenberg.org/ebook/1661, you get taken to The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle. So one of my favorite books of all time. If you have a look down here, you can see that you can view the book as plain text, or you can read this book online as HTML. So this is what the plain text looks like. It has all of the text in the book, but absolutely no structure. But when we have a look at the HTML file, you can see that it has laid out the book with a structure that is more human readable. And this is what we're going to replicate using HTML. So if you go ahead and just copy this part, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and you copy it and place it into your pen, so in the HTML section here. Now, you can see that all of this text gets put onto the screen with absolutely no structure. And in order for this to start looking like this, we're going to start adding a little bit of HTML. So the first thing we can see is that this is the largest heading on the page. So we can make our website look like that also by adding an H1 tag into our HTML. So the tags start with angular brackets and end with angular brackets, and in the middle is the type of element or the type of tag you want to use. Now, it's really important that when you open tags that you should also close them, because as you can see here, I've got an open tag, but I have yet to close it, and it thinks that the entire contents of my page should be made into the largest heading possible. And that's not what I want. I only want it for this section, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. So in order to close the tag, it's the same angle brackets, but then I have to use a / and then write H1. So now only this part is an H1 or a large heading. Now, if we have a look at the other parts, I would say that this word by is a little bit smaller than the author name. So let's structure this as a heading also, but let's make it a subtitle. So let's make it a slightly smaller heading. And to do that, we can simply wrap this text around an H2 tag. And now we have Sir Arthur Conan Doyle as a heading, but in a smaller size and shown with less importance than the big title. So now, finally, we have this word by. And I reckon that's one size smaller than this heading. So let's go ahead and wrap this inside an H3. I hope you're starting to get the gist. The heading tags get smaller as the number goes up. So for example, if I change this to an H4, it gets even smaller, H5, smaller still, and all the way until H6, which is the smallest font size for the heading element. Now, if you keep going to H7, you'll notice that it doesn't do anything anymore. It doesn't change the heading size. And that's because the heading elements only go from H1 to H6. Now, how do I know that, I hear you ask? So this is a good point in the course to introduce documentation. And the reason why I'm talking about it so early on is because of how important it is to your journey as a web developer. So one of the key skills in becoming a great web developer, or in fact any sort of programmer, is getting good at finding out how you can help yourself. And a lot of that involves getting good at Googling. How do you find the specific piece of information that's going to help you achieve what it is that you want, or help you understand what it is that you want to know? So in this case, we're talking about headings, and we are using HTML. And I'm going to add in the name of the documentation that I prefer to use, which is MDN, and it stands for the Mozilla Developer Network. So the same people who made Firefox, for example. So if I go ahead and hit enter, you see a whole bunch of results come up. And the most relevant for us is the H1 to H6, and it talks about headings. So if we click on that, you can learn more about the heading elements used in HTML. And they even have example code snippets that show you what it would look like rendered in a browser. Now, there's a couple of sources for documentation. One is, of course, MDN. Another one is called W3 Schools. So let's see if we tried W3 Schools with HTML, and we're talking about headings, right? Let's see what we get here. So HTML headings is the first result that comes up. And similarly, you've got the code examples, you've got the results, and you've got a little bit of notes that tell you how you should be using your headings. Both of these places have a lot of really useful usage notes, and it's worth reading through when you're first coming across a particular element. That way, you'll have a good foundation of knowledge when you start to build and create your own websites. So I want to show you one last resource that I quite like using, which is called devdocs.io. And this is basically a website that puts together a lot of the useful documentation in a structure that I find to be quite handy. So if we have a look inside the HTML5 tab, and we go into the elements, we can see that there's a total of 135 elements. And if you scroll down, you can see that we've got H1 through to H6. And if you click on any of these, then it brings up actually the MDN documentation. So you can see that it's similar to what we saw on MDN, but it's just structured in a very simple way, and it's very easy to follow. So that's definitely a website that's worth bookmarking. So if we head back over to our HTML file, we're going to change that back to an H3, which is an HTML tag that actually exists, as opposed to something like H9. So the next thing that we need to do in order to better replicate this website is to add some space between these lines. Now, in a word processor such as Word or Google Docs, you'll be able to simply just hit enter a few times or hit return a few times and get that spacing show up. Now, unfortunately, in HTML, it doesn't quite work like that. It's a little bit more complicated. In order to create that spacing, we actually have to use an HTML element called a line break, and it's written like so. And the interesting thing about this HTML element is that it doesn't require both an open and a close tag. So when we had the H1 through to H6 tags, you can see that we started out by marking the text with an H1, and then we closed it off with a closing tag. But the line break element works all by itself, and you can even put it inside like so to make this part go onto a new line. Now, this is a good time point to review the anatomy of HTML tags. Now, if we compare our current site against John Kleinberg's. The only major difference that you will see now is that his has a whole bunch of hyperlinks interspersed in the homepage, whereas ours is completely devoid of any hyperlinks. If we think back to what HTML stands for, we've talked about the markup language part already, but we haven't yet talked about the hypertext part of HTML. So hypertext is basically just a bunch of text documents that can be linked together using these hyperlinks. So when you click on one of them, it takes you to a different text document, and then you click on a link there and it takes you to another different text document. And that's where the HT part of HTML comes from. And in fact, if you're interested, there is even a game called the Wiki Game, where you have a starting Wikipedia article and a goal Wikipedia article, and you have to click through the links on Wikipedia to try and navigate to the goal article. And it's basically an association game that's played using hyperlinks. Now, what are these links made of? If you have a look at each and every one of these links, if you right-click on it and click Inspect, you know that you can bring up the Google Chrome developer tools. And if we have a look, you can see that it's actually pointing towards a tag with a hyperlink reference to the destination that this link is going to take you to. And before the A tag gets closed, that's the link text. So in this case, it's the word computer science that gets underlined. And when you click on it, it takes you to cs.cornell.edu. Let's go ahead and implement this for our website. So there's many places where maybe you'd want to direct people away. So maybe I can link them to the App Brewery's website here. Or I could show them examples of me brewing beer or me riding motorcycles. Let's go ahead and try that in code. So the first place that I want to add a link to is this part where it says the App Brewery. So I'm going to put an A tag or an anchor tag just in front and close the A tag just behind. And if you want to have a look at the structure of the anchor tag, then as you remember, you can always go to the MDN web docs and you can read all about the anchor element and all of its attributes. Now, the main attribute that we're going to be concerned with is the href. And this is a URL that the hyperlink is going to point to, or the destination of that hyperlink. In my case, the destination is going to be appbrewery.co. And if I just copy that, then I can head over here and add an A tag or an anchor tag just before where it says the App Brewery. And this is what the autofill is going to write for me. So let's have a look at the structure in a bit more detail. As with the other HTML elements we've seen, the anchor tag has the A as the element name. And then the most important attribute that you're going to find yourself using is the href. And this is set to equal the link destination. So where are you going to take your user when they click on this link? And the anchor tag is not a self-closing tag. So it has a closing tag at the end. And between the open tag and the closing tag is our link text. So that's the bit of text that's going to be underlined and highlighted in blue so that the user knows that when they click on this word, this is going to take them to that link. So in our case, our href is going to be this URL. And between the open anchor tag and the closing anchor tag, we're going to put the link text. So the bit of text that's going to be underlined. And in my case, I'm just going to cut this phrase here and put it inside the anchor tag. So now you can see there's actually two sets of HTML elements that enclose this line of text. It is simultaneously going to be strong, i.e. bolded, and it's also going to act as a link to the appbrewery.co website. So if we hit save and let's go back over here and hit refresh, you can see that this has now been underlined and it's highlighted in a different color. Now, by convention, the highlight is going to be blue if it's a link that we've never clicked on, and it's going to be purple if we have clicked on it in the past. And just to confirm, if we click on it, it takes us to appbrewery.co. Brilliant. So that's working as expected. Now, why don't you go ahead and add some links to your hobbies? So you know how they say in interviews you should always prove that you've done what you say you've done? Go ahead and add some links, maybe to images on the internet or to YouTube videos, anything that you like. And it doesn't have to be in your hobbies. It could be in your books and teaching or education or any part of your website, basically. So go ahead and pause the video and add some more links. So adding links to the ordered list or the unordered list is exactly the same as what we've done up here. So I'm going to go ahead and add an anchor tag to beer brewing. So I'm going to hit enter to create my anchor tag. I'm going to put the words beer brewing in between my anchor tag so that will act as the link text. And my href is going to be a YouTube video that I've got where I show people my beer brewing. So let's go ahead and copy that and paste it into here. And then I'm going to add another anchor tag here just to fill up the motorcycle part. All right, so now I've added 2 links, one for beer brewing and one for the word motorcycles, both inside my ordered list. So if we hit save and we hit refresh, then you'll see we've now got 2 links and they're blue because we've never clicked on it before. So if I hold down the command button on my keyboard or control on Windows and click on each of these links, then they'll open up in new tabs and we can have a look at my evidence that I have indeed done some beer brewing or motorcycling. Now that we've seen how to create some anchor tags that point to links on the internet, what if I wanted to create a separate page for the My Hobbies section, and I wanted to create a link that linked to my own page? Let's head back into Atom, and inside this HTML personal site folder where we've got our index.html, so this file, I'm going to right click and I'm going to click new file. And the new file is going to be called hobbies.html, and it's going to be created inside the same folder as index. So you can see they're at the same hierarchical level. Now for hobbies HTML, I'm first going to add the HTML boilerplate code, and the title is going to be my hobbies. In the body, I'm just going to copy all of this and I'm going to hit Command X or Control X to cut, and then I'm going to paste it over here. So now if I hit save for hobbies and I go back to the index.html and I create a new anchor tag, and it's going to have the link text of my hobbies. And the href is going to be the file name. So in this case, it'll be hobbies.html. Now, if I hit save and I go back to my website, hit refresh, that ordered list has disappeared and is now replaced by this hyperlink. And if I click on it, it takes me to this brand new page that I've created called My Hobbies. So now you can see how you can really easily start to create multiple pages of your website. And as long as you've got it inside the same folder, or you can specify a path for the browser to get to it, then you can start linking up your homepage with all of these different satellite pages, and you start to build up a website rather than just a web page. As a challenge, I want you to create another page that is going to contain your contact details. So how do you get in touch? So say if somebody came across your personal site and they wanted to hire you or they wanted to message you. Now, it's probably quite cluttering to have it on the home page. So we want to create another link down here that says contact me. And it's going to link to another page just like My Hobbies, but it's going to contain maybe your address, maybe your email, maybe your telephone, whatever you're comfortable with giving to the internet. Go ahead, pause the video and give it a go. All right, so it's going to be exactly the same as what we did for My Hobbies. So we're going to go to our HTML personal site folder. We're going to right click on it. We're going to create a new file, and this is going to be called contact me.html. And here we're going to again start with the HTML boilerplate, and the title is going to be contact me. And in the body, we're going to have an H1, that's my contact details. And then below that, maybe a paragraph, that's going to be my fictional address. And maybe another one that's going to be some fictional number, telephone number to contact me with, and then it will be my email@gmail.com. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and hit save, go back to index.html and add another anchor tag where we link to this page called contact-me.html. And the link text will just be contact me. And we're going to hit save and refresh. And now we can click on here to this brand new page. All right, so today's lesson was all about the anchor tag, and be sure to check out the anchor tag reference on MDN Web Docs. And there's a whole bunch of other attributes that you can read about, and there's really good examples that can show you some of the other functionality that you can have by simply including the anchor tag. So that's all from me for today. I will see you on the next lesson. Now, the other thing that I want to do with the website is if we have a look at Thomas Corman's site, you can see that he's got his picture on the left and his name and his title and his blurb next to that image. And that's quite a nice layout. So we can do that here as well. We can have our image on the left and all of this on the right next to the image. Now, because we haven't yet spoken about CSS and styling, if we wanted to only use pure HTML to affect how this part of our website looks, then we can use our tables to do that. So let's go up here where the body of our website begins, and let's add a table. Let's add a table row. And inside this row, it's only going to have 2 table cells or TD elements. And the first TD element is going to contain the image. And the second TD element is going to contain all of this up to the horizontal rule. So let's just cut it and paste it into here. Now we can hit save and let's refresh our page. And you can see that we're getting close to this kind of structure where we've got a single table with only 2 columns and 2 cells, this being one cell and this being the other cell. And that allows us to get this kind of layout for our website. Now you can see here that there's a little bit of a gap between the image and the text, whereas on our site, it's right up and next to the image. Now, if you wanted to increase that distance, then you can achieve that by changing the table's cell spacing. And if you have a look in the attributes, you can see this attribute called cell spacing, which defines the size of the space between 2 cells in a percentage value or pixels. So let's go ahead and add some spacing to our table. So inside our table element, we're going to use cell spacing, and let's set it to equal 20 and hit save. And then let's go and have a look. Nice, that looks pretty good, right? All right, so previously we managed to get our website to include images as well as links. So we added these image tags as well as anchor tags, which can take us to external sites, but also to internal sites, like the brand new My Hobbies page that we created, or the Contact Me. Now in this lesson, we're going to take things a little bit further. In our personal site /CV, I want to have a section where we can list our work experience, so what we've done and when we've done it. Currently, if we went into our code and say below that unordered list and we add a H3, let's call it work experience. Now, so if we added a standard paragraph tag and we said maybe 2010 to 2013, let's say lead developer at Tempo app. So let's save that and take a look. And if we refresh, then it looks like this, which is all well and good if we have that range. But what if I wanted to add something where I didn't have a year range? So if it was 2010 when I worked as a researcher at Institute of Cognitive Neurosciences. So let's save that and let's refresh. And you can see that it looks really awkward, right? Like this part and this part, they're not really indented at the same level horizontally. And everything just looks really messy. So how can we implement something that looks nice like this, where there's even a bit of padding in between and everything looks really regular? Well, one of the ways that we can achieve this using just HTML is to create a table. So if we have a look at the docs on MDN, and we look at table, you can see that a very simple table just looks like this. This is a bog standard simple table. But tables can get really complicated as well, and you can use it to structure and represent data in your website. So we could have table headings, we could have different cells, we could have column groups and columns, we can have captions, and a whole bunch of things. So let's try and add a table to our website so that we can make our CV look a little bit more like this. So let's first add a horizontal rule here between our table and these two links. And let's use autocomplete to add a table tag for us. Inside a table, we can create table rows and also table data, which are essentially like cells. So say if we create a brand new table row, and it's really helpful that autosuggest actually tells you what each of these tags are. So let's go ahead and hit enter. So this is a single row. And if I want to create another row underneath, then I would just have to create another TR. Now inside the top row, I'm going to have two table data elements, or rather two cells in this single row. And to represent the cells, I'm going to use the TD or table data element. So the first cell is going to contain my date, and the second cell is going to contain what I did. So that's our first row complete. Now let's go ahead and create another two cells or another two TDs inside our second row. So let's again copy and paste the date and the work into the table data elements. And I'm going to delete these two paragraphs. Let's hit save, go back to our website and hit refresh and see what it looks like. Okay, that's already looking a lot better than before, right? It being a table means that our columns are structured together. So these two lines are structured so that they are indented to the same place, and it makes it look so much neater than before. Now, aside from having just rows and cells, tables also have headers, body, and footer, mirroring what we have for our HTML websites. And you can declare them quite simply by writing t-head for table head, and t-body for table body, and t-foot for table footer. Now, inside the table head, we can add some titles to each of our columns, and they get formatted by default in bold. So if we create a new table row, and inside this row, instead of creating table data or TD elements, we're going to create TH elements, or a table header cell element. And inside here, we're going to give the name of our first column, which is going to be dates. And then we're going to create another table header cell, and this one is going to be the work that we did. So let's hit save and hit refresh, and you'll see that we now have table headings for each of our columns. Now, for those of you guys who might have been playing around with this code, you would have realized that if I cut this table row, and instead of putting it inside the header, I actually put it just inside the main table, and I delete all of this, and we hit save and we hit refresh, you'll notice that it looks exactly the same. And that's because we're using these special elements, the table header cell elements, and most browsers know how these should be formatted. So it looks exactly the same. But the reason why we might have different sections of our table, for example, putting these cells inside the table head and putting these inside the body, is because sometimes we might want to select and isolate the table header and the table body in order to style it differently or make it function in a different way. For example, if we separated the table header from the table body, we can use some code to isolate the header and fix it in place so that when users scroll through our table, we can keep these headings on screen. Now that requires a little bit more fancy stuff like CSS or JavaScript, which we'll wait until later modules to talk about. But it's a good reason to be aware of why you might want to place the header cells inside the head, the main body of the table inside the body, and maybe some footer cells into the table footer. And generally, this is the structure that you'll see for most tables, with a head and with a body. Now, if we have a look at these tables on the MDN developer docs, you can see that they've got outlines whereas what we've created doesn't have any borders or boundaries or outlines at all. If we take a look at the MDN developer docs for the table element, you can see that there's a whole bunch of attributes, such as background color, or border, or cell padding, cell spacing, and a whole bunch of things that you can apply to the table element to change its appearance. But if you take a closer look at each of these styling attributes, then you can see they all have a little thumbs down sign next to them. And this is because all of these attributes for the table element are deprecated. And you'll hear that word quite often in programming across many different languages and disciplines. And what that word means is that it's almost like it's downgraded. It's something that they no longer recommend you using. And the reason is because we have to always keep in mind that HTML is for structure, CSS is for styling, and JavaScript is for behavior. And even though it's possible to affect the style of your website through using HTML attributes or through using different HTML elements, you have to try and resist when you can. But since we haven't yet learned about CSS, I want to take you to the primitive days before web designers had access to CSS, what they might have done using just HTML. And if we scroll through these attributes, you'll come across something called border. And this defines in pixels the size of the frame that's surrounding the table. We can add this attribute to our table element, not to t-head or table row or table heading cell or any of the other ones, because we're currently reading the table docs, remember? And we can add it and say border equals 1 pixel, let's say. And if we refresh our site, then we'll see this incredibly ugly HTML table that you'll see a lot in websites from the 90s. So let's get rid of it. Let's just quickly recap the HTML structure for creating a table. To start off, we create this table tag and we also close it. And everything in between is the actual contents of our table. This just creates a simple table. Now, by default, your browser will style the table to not have any borders or padding or anything style related. Now, in order for our table to actually start holding some pieces of data, we're going to have to create something called a table row. And between the open and closing TR tags is where the data for that row is going to go. And this section of code will just create a single row inside our table. Again, with no associated styling. So if there's nothing between these two tags, then you won't actually see anything appear on screen. Now, the next part is our table data, or rather our table cells that we create using the TD tag. And in between the open and closing TD tags, we place the actual data that's going to go into that cell. And this is a single table cell that's going to contain the words Angela, and it's going to go inside the first table row. And so over here. And as you populate your table with more rows and more data, then you will see this structure reflected on your website. So the biggest hurdle that you have to get over is that there are no table columns. All that you're doing is going from top to bottom, defining new table rows. And inside each row, you're putting in individual cells. And each cell gets placed horizontally, one after the other, creating effectively the columns. While the main job of tables is to display structured data, you can also see how you could use it to affect the layout of the various HTML elements on your website. And that's what we're going to look at in the next lesson. Now that we've completed the HTML section, and we have our completed website, but we can only access it locally, because when we open up our index.html, you can see that we're just opening a local file, right? In this case, this file's inside my users folder, inside my username, inside my desktop. But that means nobody else can actually access this website, which makes it a bit pointless, right? The whole point of a website is so that we could put it onto the internet and everybody will be able to see our personal site or our CV. So how can we do this? Well, in order to do that, we need to host our website somewhere. Now, there's a whole bunch of hosting sites such as GoDaddy or Bluehost, but because we're learning at the moment, we don't want to have to pay for this. So there's also a free solution that I'm going to show you. By the end of this lesson, you're going to have your personal CV up on the internet proudly displayed somewhere, and you'll be able to share a URL or a link to it so that anybody across the web can be able to access it. But first things first, we'll need to do a little bit of setup. The service that we're going to use is GitHub. And we're going to talk about GitHub in a lot of detail a little bit later on. It's a really, really useful tool that is pretty much essential to a developer's workflow. But for now, we're only going to use one of its features, which is hosting our website. So first and foremost, if you don't have a GitHub account, then you'll need to set up a new one. So I'm just going to set one up while we're at it. And now it'll ask you to choose a plan. Now we're going to choose the free plan. And then we're going to click continue. Now I'm going to skip this questionnaire and just click on skip this step. Now, once you have signed up to GitHub, it's really important that you go ahead and verify your email address. So check your emails and see if you have something from GitHub, and then click on that verify link. And once you've done that, you'll be able to add new repositories to GitHub. If you head over to the upper right corner and just click on the plus button, and then we're going to create a new repository. This repository, I'm just going to call it CV, and this is going to be the name of my project. And all that a repository is, it's simply just a folder out there on the cloud that's going to store all of your project-related files. And you'll be able to make changes to the files and update the files, and you'll be able to track all of those changes that you've made in the past. Now that we've given our repository a name, then we're going to leave the description as empty, and then we're going to keep public selected. And then down here, make sure that you check this box where we initialize this repository with a README. And it's really, really important that you do this for the next few steps to work. So now that we've done all of that, we're going to go ahead and click on Create Repository. And this will take just a moment, and now you should see a page that looks like this, which means that your repository has been created. And the only file that's in your repository is just a README file. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and upload our files for our CV website. So now if you bring up the folder which contains your CV website, so the place where you see your index.html, your images folder, and any other pages you have, you're going to select all of these and you're going to drag it into this box here. And that will upload and add all of them to our online repository. Once that's done, we're going to give this particular version a name. So we'll say that in this version, we added initial CV website files, and then go ahead and click to commit these changes. And that will upload all of those files that we dragged on, and we are now ready to set up our GitHub page. If you head over to the Settings tab here, you will see that there is a section called Pages. And GitHub Pages is designed to host your personal, organization, or project pages from a GitHub repository. So we already have the repository. We now have to activate our pages. So it's currently disabled. All we have to do to enable it, we just have to select a source where our files reside. So if you click on this part where it says None, then select Main as your branch and go ahead and click Save. So now GitHub is going to do some behind the scenes stuff, and it's going to be publishing towards a place which is going to be your username.github.io/your project name. So that will be your CV. And you can see this is a HTTPS website, so you'll be able to access this site from anywhere across the world as long as you're connected to the internet. Now, this publishing process takes a little while. You'll see that it says your site is published at this address, and if you click on that address, you should be able to see your website show up. Now, if at this point what you see instead is a 404, then that just means that you have to be a little bit more patient. The GitHub servers are probably working overtime, and come back in maybe half an hour and check that link again. But once you are done though, then your website should work exactly as it did locally. But now you can go ahead and share this link with anybody you like across the world, and they can access it because it's now hosted on the internet. So you can go ahead and go over to angelbauer.github.io/CV, and you too will be able to see this website that I just uploaded and I'm looking at right now. Now, if after half an hour and you click on this link and it still doesn't show your website, or there are some inconsistencies on it, then you might have to troubleshoot your setup because you might have made a mistake somewhere. Now, the first